Lord, protect us. We're surrounded. The desperate voice crackles through the radio as chaos erupts in the valley. 22 Navy SEALs are pinned down, surrounded by hidden gunfire, with death closing in from every side. And above them, silent and unseen, lies a single sniper. Cassandra Ghostwind, Delaine, with nothing but her rifle, her training, and exactly 60 bullets. No air support for 17 minutes, no backup. Just her against an army. This is the story of how one overlooked soldier became the line between survival and massacre. And the question is, could a ghost on the mountain truly change the fate of an entire team? What followed would defy every doubt, every dismissal, and every prediction of failure. The wind that shaped Cassandra, ghost wind, Delaine's life was not the kind that rattled windows or bent trees. It was the thin, cutting current of the Colorado high country, air so sharp and clean that every breath seemed to etch itself into memory. She was born at 10,000 feet above sea level, in a town where winter snow lingered long into spring, and where the mountains were both a playground and a harsh tutor. Her father, Master Gunnery Sergeant William Delaine, had returned from Vietnam with hands that trembled when he tried to light a cigarette, but eyes that never stopped scanning horizons. Those eyes had saved men once, catching flickers of movement where ambushes waited, but they also carried ghosts he never managed to bury. The war followed him home, and so did the habit of discipline. For Cassandra, childhood was a series of lessons disguised as survival. He taught her to breathe as though air was rationed. The mountain never forgives mistakes, he would say, his voice both gravel and wisdom. On long hikes up granite ridges, he'd stop her mid-stride. Look again. Do you see the shadow that doesn't belong? The stone that's been moved? He was sharpening her eyes, making her see patterns where others saw only wilderness. Her mother had once shared in those climbs. A flight nurse with a fierce streak of compassion, she believed mountains could be conquered if you carried enough heart. That belief cost her life. When Cassandra was only 10, her mother vanished into a storm during a rescue mission for stranded climbers. The helicopter never made it out. The official report called it altitude sickness mixed with weather. William called it a reminder that even kindness is punished when you underestimate the mountain. From then on, Cassandra grew under a philosophy carved in both grief and discipline. The rifle became her inheritance, not as a weapon of aggression, but as a tool of focus. By 15, she could drive 5 bullets through a dime at 300 meters. Not in a sterile shooting range, but on mountainsides where winds shifted unpredictably and oxygen thinned the longer you stayed prone. Neighbors whispered about William being too hard on his daughter, about training instead of raising. Yet Cassandra never resented him. She understood that his trembling hands, which fumbled with spoons at the dinner table, grew steady only when they passed her the knowledge he wished someone had given him before Vietnam. His love was carved in lessons, not words. By 18, she was competing in national high-power rifle matches. While her peers studied prom dresses and college applications, Cassandra studied wind drift, bullet drop, and trigger squeeze. She wasn't loud, wasn't celebrated. She was simply consistent, so consistent that recruiters noticed. The U.S. Army offered her a path that bypassed the ordinary. She became one of the few women pushed into sniper school at Fort Benning. The odds were stacked against her, not because of skill, but because of tradition. Yet tradition broke the moment she graduated first in her class. The call sign Ghostwind was born from her uncanny ability to vanish into landscapes and let the environment do her talking. Instructors swore they lost track of her in open terrain. She moved with the mountain rather than against it. Where others forced camouflage, she became part of the ridgeline. One evaluator wrote, "She doesn't hunt, she waits. And when she waits, the environment seems to shift in her favor." But beyond the precision and accolades, Cassandra remained someone few noticed outside of her rifle scope. She was the quiet soldier at the edge of a formation, the one whose voice rarely cut through briefings, the one dismissed as support rather than centerpiece. That invisibility was both a curse and a gift. Invisibility meant underestimation, and underestimation could be weaponized. Because the truth, rarely acknowledged until crisis, was that the overlooked often carried the weight of survival. Cassandra had been forged in silence, in loss, in the kind of solitude that made hesitation unthinkable. She had already seen how quickly a mountain could erase a life, how swiftly fate punished those who weren't paying attention. And that sharpened her into something more than a soldier. It made her into the line no one saw until it was too late. The invisible edge between life and death, between survival and massacre. The forward operating base was a patchwork of tents, HESCO barriers, and dust that never seemed to settle. Inside the command tent, the air smelled of burnt coffee and printer ink. Maps were spread across a table, screens glowed with satellite images, and officers leaned forward as though leaning closer to technology made the truth more reliable. Cassandra Ghostwind Delaine sat at the far end, her notebook filled with 3 weeks of observations from the ridgelines above the Caringal Valley. She wasn't supposed to speak. Attachments rarely did. An Army sniper embedded with Navy SEALs was already an anomaly, tolerated because her expertise in mountain warfare filled a gap they couldn't ignore on paper. But when Captain Marcus Vance began his briefing, Cassandra knew silence would cost lives. Vance clicked through slides with the confidence of a man convinced satellites never lied. His tone was clipped, almost smug. Signals intelligence shows limited chatter. Taliban presence. 12, maybe 15 fighters. No signs of fortified positions. Our drones confirm scattered movement, nothing organized. On the screen, the valley looked deceptively empty, a pale stretch of terrain carved by erosion and time. Cassandra felt the weight of her father's words pressing on her chest. The mountain never forgives mistakes. She had hiked those ridges, studied the slopes where shepherds no longer walked, traced footprints that appeared at night and vanished by morning. She had watched shadows lengthen over dug-in fighting positions that satellites, with their brief passes, had missed. When Vance dismissed the slide with a flourish, Cassandra rose. The tent quieted, more from surprise than respect. Few expected the quiet sniper to interrupt. "Sir," she began, her voice calm, steady, "your assessment doesn't account for what the ground is telling us. I've identified at least 6 fortified machine gun nests along the eastern ridge. The trails leading in and out aren't random. They've been improving fighting positions, stone by stone. By my count, we're looking at 40 fighters minimum." The silence lasted only a moment before Vance let out a laugh. Sharp, dismissive. "Staff Sergeant, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this isn't about counting rocks or guessing from shadows. Our signals intelligence is clear. The enemy here is scattered, disorganized. You're overthinking." A murmur rippled across the room. Cassandra stood her ground. "With respect, sir, SIGINT can be manipulated. You're seeing what they want you to see. The valley funnels movement into a choke point. It's textbook for an L-shaped ambush. If we walk into that, we won't be walking out." Commander Aaron Lockhart, the SEAL team leader, shifted in his chair. He was a man who valued decisiveness, and his history with Vance stretched back through several operations. That trust was visible in the slight nod he gave, siding almost reflexively with the intelligence officer. "Noted, Sergeant Delaine," he said, his voice firm but dismissive. "Your observations are valuable, but we can't base operational planning on paranoia. We'll proceed according to Captain Vance's analysis." Cassandra felt the weight of being an outsider more heavily than the rifle she carried. Army among Navy. Intuition against technology. A woman in a room where confidence often mattered more than evidence. She could have pressed harder, could have forced the issue, but she knew what resistance would bring. The label of insubordination, the stigma of being difficult. Instead, she closed her notebook slowly, her jaw tightening with restraint. Inside, however, she was replaying the map of the valley she had drawn from memory. Every ridge, every depression, every unnatural line of rock that betrayed human hands. She saw the ambush before it happened, as clearly as if it were unfolding right then. And this was the truth she carried. War was never just data on a screen. It was the smell of disturbed soil, the absence of goats on a hillside, the unnatural pattern of stones no wind could shape. Technology was useful, but a sniper's intuition, honed by years in the mountains, was certainty born of experience, not guesswork. Yet in that tent, her certainty was invisible. What mattered was Vance's confident voice, his slides, and Lockhart's trust in a man who had never set foot on those ridges. Cassandra walked out not defeated, but resigned, knowing the mountain would prove her right. though she prayed it wouldn't be paid for in blood. The tragedy of war is that the voices worth hearing are often ignored. Cassandra's warning was filed away, but the mountain was listening. The morning sun bled slowly across the jagged ridges of the Caringal Valley, lighting the sandstone cliffs in muted gold. To the seals moving below, it was just another stretch of Afghan terrain, hostile yet deceptively quiet. Boots crunched on gravel, rifles swept from ridge to ridge, and every man believed they were advancing in textbook formation. Cassandra, Ghostwind. Delaine knew better. From her hide 90 meters above the valley floor, she had been watching the rhythm of the land for hours. The way birds avoided certain slopes, the faint scarring of rocks where tripods had been dragged into place, the silence that was not natural but manufactured. Every detail confirmed what she had tried to tell them in the briefing. This valley was a kill zone. The first shot came not from their rifles, but from the enemy. A plume of smoke streaked upward as an RPG whooshed across the valley. It struck a ridge 20 meters from the lead element, shattering stone into a deadly spray. Instantly, 6 PKM machine guns opened up in unison, the sound bouncing between the cliffs like rolling thunder. Chaos erupted. "Contact left! Contact right!" Voices roared over comms. Bullets sparked off boulders. Tracers carved fiery arcs across the valley. The SEALs scrambled for cover that barely existed, huddling behind rocks no wider than their shoulders. And then came the voice, cracked with terror, carried through Cassandra's earpiece. "We're surrounded. Lord, save us!" The prayer cut through the rattle of machine gun fire. It was raw, desperate, the kind of cry only a soldier who knew he was seconds from death could utter. Cassandra's breath slowed even more. The chaos of the battlefield narrowed to a tunnel. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "In the storm, you must be the calm." Down in the kill zone, Captain Marcus Vance was unraveling. Cassandra could hear him shouting over the net, panic edging every word. "This is Red Actual, requesting immediate air support. Do you copy? We are under heavy fire, need extract now." His words tumbled over each other, frantic, pleading. The response came back sharp and merciless. "ETA 17 minutes. QRF 23. You're on your own until then." 17 minutes. For men pinned under interlocking fields of fire, 17 minutes might as well have been a lifetime, or a death sentence. Cassandra pressed herself deeper into the limestone outcropping, ghillie suit blending seamlessly with the jagged rocks. Her rifle rested steady, scope already dialed for the ranges she had memorized. She had exactly 60 rounds, 60 opportunities to rewrite what would otherwise be a massacre. Below, the SEALs tried to return fire, but the ambush had been perfectly laid. Every move drew a fresh spray of bullets. A medic was crawling toward a downed operator when another RPG detonated near him, sending dust and screams into the air. Cassandra's finger found the trigger. She let her body become the stillness her father had taught her. 4 breaths per minute. Inhale, pause. Exhale, pause. She felt her heartbeats and timed herself between them, waiting for the quiet place. Through her Schmidt and Bender scope, she found the first machine gunner on the northern ridge, 640 meters. Slight downhill angle, wind brushing left to right at 1.3 meters per second. She adjusted elevation, held for wind, and squeezed. The man's head snapped back before his body even hit the ground. Cassandra was already shifting to the assistant gunner. Bolt cycled, crosshairs steady. Second trigger pull. Another body fell. The radio came alive. "Ghost! Ghost, is that you?" 2 clicks. Affirmative. No wasted words. Sound discipline mattered. She pivoted east. Scope zeroed in on an RPG team setting up. 1 round clean through the gunner's forehead. His partner dove for cover. Cassandra tracked the predictable line of movement and placed a bullet exactly where he landed. 4 down. The Taliban fighters below were confused now, firing wildly into the ridges. They knew death was coming from above, but they couldn't see her. She had chosen her perch perfectly. Sun behind her, shadow masking her hide, the limestone reflecting and distorting sound. In the valley, Commander Aaron Lockhart dragged a wounded SEAL behind a boulder, trying to keep morale together. He didn't say it, but Cassandra could sense his realization. The sniper they'd dismissed was the only reason his men were still breathing. Cassandra shifted again. Southern ridge, 2 gunners displacing. She tracked them through a gap in the rocks, steady as stone. 2 precise shots, 2 more bodies down. 6 kills in less than 2 minutes. Gold lead. This is Ghost. Cassandra's voice finally broke through the comms, calm and clipped. Multiple targets neutralized. You have a window to move. A brief silence, then Lockhart's reply. Copy Ghost, moving. But not everyone could move. Through her scope, Cassandra spotted a SEAL bleeding heavily, crimson pumping from his leg. The medic couldn't reach him, pinned by fire from the western ridge. At 720 meters, only a sliver of the machine gunner was exposed, shoulder and part of his head. The shot was long, the wind gusting higher. The wounded man had maybe 90 seconds. Her father's trembling hands flashed in her mind. Not fear, memory of lives lost because a shot came too late. Cassandra adjusted elevation. 23 clicks, held 2 mils right, waited for the half second when the gunner leaned out. She fired. Nearly a full second passed before the bullet struck. The gunner fell backward, rifle clattering against stone. The medic dashed forward, tourniquet snapping tight, pressure dressing applied. Life saved. Cassandra exhaled slowly. One crisis contained, but more coming. From the corners of her scope, she caught movement. Taliban fighters flanking up the slopes toward her position. 10 of them moving with deadly intent. They had finally deduced there was only one sniper, and they were coming to kill her. Cassandra had 38 rounds left. 12 minutes until the helicopters arrived, and only herself, hidden in the rocks, standing between survival and annihilation. She whispered into the radio, almost to herself, "In the storm, I am the calm." And then she prepared to work. The valley roared with chaos, but in Cassandra, Ghostwind, Delaine's world, everything slowed into silence. For the SEALs below, minutes felt like hours. For her, each second was carved into mathematics, breath, and trigger pressure. 38 rounds remained, each one had to count. She adjusted her cheek weld against the rifle stock, eye locked to the Schmittenbender PMII scope. A gust of wind teased dust across the rocks. 1.7 meters per second, right to left. She dialed half a mil, then settled. The target was a machine gunner repositioning on the eastern ridge, his PKM spitting fire toward the pinned SEAL medic. Cassandra inhaled slowly, held her breath in the quiet pocket between heartbeats, and pressed. The bullet punched through his chest, dropping him instantly. Before the echo died, her bolt hand already worked, cycling the next round. The assistant gunner reached for the weapon. Cassandra anticipated it. Reticle centered, squeezed. Another hostile silenced. 2 lives saved, perhaps 3. This was the sniper's paradox. Distant death in service of immediate life. She shifted to her next sector. A fighter darted across an open slope, trying to close the gap on the SEALs. Cassandra read the terrain, calculated the angle. Downhill shot, 420 meters. Gravity pulled faster at this range. She clicked elevation, corrected for drop. 1 steady breath, 1 squeeze. The fighter folded mid-stride, momentum carrying him lifeless into the dust. 1 bullet, 1 SEAL still breathing. Below, the comms buzzed with fragments of desperation. "We're black on ammo. Medics hit." God, they're everywhere. Cassandra heard it all, but her focus never wavered. Noise was irrelevant. Her world narrowed to wind, distance, and target. She remembered her father's words, whispered years ago on a Colorado ridgeline. Numbers don't lie. Angles don't lie. If you respect them, your bullet will go where it should. The only variable is your will. Another team of Taliban fighters emerged, crawling up the western slope in an attempt to flank the valley. Cassandra knew if they reached the ridgeline, the SEALs would be enveloped from every angle. She counted 6 men, spread in a staggered formation. 35 rounds left. She couldn't afford misses. She steadied her scope on the lead climber. 500 meters, crosswind rising. She adjusted a full mil, squeezed, impact, chest cavity collapsed. Shifted instantly, second man dropped as he raised his rifle. Third man, crouching. Cassandra waited for his head to break cover. The moment he leaned, she fired. 3 down. Her breathing remained calm, almost unnatural amidst the thunder below. 4 breaths per minute. Inhale, exhale, pause. The pause was everything. It was where death waited for her finger to decide. By the time the sixth climber fell, her magazine was nearly empty. She reloaded smoothly, no wasted motion. The SEALs now had breathing room. Every shot Cassandra fired was more than arithmetic. It was responsibility. She could almost feel the pulse of each man below, as if their hearts were tied to her trigger finger. She was invisible, unheard, yet every action decided who lived and who didn't. In that silence, she carried 22 souls. This was the essence of a sniper. Cold mathematics bound to a warm, unrelenting duty. To outsiders, it looked mechanical. Distance, clicks, mil dots. But for Cassandra, it was personal. Her father's trembling hands haunted her memory, the weight of lives not saved. She refused to let those ghosts multiply. Each equation solved through her scope was not just physics, it was a vow. Another radio burst clawed through the static. "Ghost, they're closing from the north." Cassandra pivoted, scope sweeping. She caught 3 fighters sprinting through a gully, trying to rush the SEAL perimeter. Distance 360 meters. Too fast for leisurely calculation. She switched to instinct, the kind honed by years in mountain wind. Snapshot, first fighter down. Adjust, second fell mid-leap. Third stumbled, confused, and Cassandra placed a round clean through his back before he could fire. The valley quieted for a moment, punctuated only by the SEAL's labored breathing over comms. She had bought them another 30 seconds of life. Her rifle barrel smoked faintly, metal hot from the steady rhythm of precision. She wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her glove, eyes never leaving the scope. No words, no celebration. Her silence was louder than any order barked into a radio. It said, "I am here, I am watching, you are not alone." She had 26 rounds left, 11 minutes until air support. The battle was far from over, but Cassandra had already rewritten the rhythm of the valley. What began as a slaughter was turning into resistance, and it was all because of one woman, lying invisible in stone, her voice absent, her bullets the only language spoken. The battle in the Caringal Valley had become a cruel rhythm. Gunfire echoing from the ridges, SEALs gasping for breath behind brittle rocks. Cassandra's shots carving seconds of survival into the chaos. But even as she bought time, the enemy adapted. The Taliban commander, sharp enough to realize there was only one sniper, ordered his men to break from the kill zone and climb. 2 flanking teams emerged from opposite directions, one pushing from the north, the other from the south. 10 men in each squad, seasoned fighters who knew the rocks, knew how to stalk prey. Their rifles barked at shadows, their boots scraping the mountainside as they ascended toward her position. Cassandra saw them through her scope. Her heartbeat slowed, but her mind quickened. She had been here before, in training, in Iraq, in the dark recesses of her father's stories. Staying put meant death. If she remained in her current hide, the flanking units would pin her down and crush her. She had to move. It was the most dangerous decision a sniper could make, abandoning a perfected hide for a secondary position. Movement meant exposure. Exposure meant death. Yet in war, the only choice worse than risk was hesitation. She slid backward, every muscle coiled in discipline. Stones shifted under her weight, and gunfire snapped past, close enough for shards to slice her cheek. Cassandra gritted her teeth, then dove behind a boulder, crawling toward the fallback location she had identified days earlier. It was lower, less commanding, but invisible to the enemy's expectations. The climb down felt eternal, but she reached it, pressed herself against the limestone, and reassembled her firing lane. Through the narrow gap in the rocks, she now saw the flanking teams. They were still searching where she had been moments ago, guns trained on an empty hide. The first fighter crept cautiously across the ridge. Cassandra's reticle hovered on his chest. She exhaled, paused, squeezed. He crumpled silently. His partner turned at the noise, eyes wide, just in time to meet a second round that shattered the still air. The Taliban began shouting, pointing, spraying bullets into the wrong rocks. Cassandra moved with calm efficiency. She tracked the leader on his radio, coordinating the push. One breath, one squeeze. Silence. 8 fighters remained on that slope. Cassandra cycled her bolt, steady as metronome ticks, each shot thinning the numbers. She worked the mountain like a chessboard, predicting where men would move when fear and instinct drove them. By the time the last body slumped against the ridge, her magazine was empty. She reloaded quickly, but already the southern flank was pressing closer. Through her scope, she caught sight of them. Dark figures scrambling upward, rifles flashing. They were closer than she liked, only 400 meters now, and gaining. She had no luxury of time. Cassandra fired fast but precise, controlled bursts of death. One fighter fell mid-sprint, another tumbled backward, his rifle clattering down the rocks. The third ducked, thinking he was safe behind cover. Cassandra sent a round straight through the crack of stone that framed his head. The SEALs below began to move. Commander Lockhart's voice came sharp over comms. "Ghost, this is Gold Lead. We're shifting to extract point. Can you hold?" Cassandra clicked her mic twice. Affirmative. Words wasted oxygen and attention. She had only focus left to give. Her ammunition dwindled. 15 rounds, then 10. Each one spent carefully, deliberately, to delay the inevitable. The valley was still alive with fire, but the SEALs were moving under her umbrella of precision. Cassandra had become the storm they needed. Unseen, relentless. The single thread keeping annihilation at bay. Minutes dragged into lifetimes. Cassandra wiped blood from her cheek where fragments had cut her skin. She ignored the sting. She had learned from her father. Pain was nothing compared to regret, and regret was born from hesitation. At last, the thudding rotors of MH-60 helicopters rolled across the valley like distant thunder. Dust whipped into the air, scattering through the smoke. Relief flickered across the SEALs' movements. But Cassandra knew the extraction itself was the most dangerous moment. The Taliban would throw everything at them now. Through her scope, she caught figures racing toward the landing zone, with RPGs slung over their shoulders. If one rocket found its mark, the helicopters would become fireballs. Cassandra steadied herself, ignoring the roar of the rotors. 5 rounds left. She dialed her elevation, adjusted for wind, and fired. First RPG man down. 4 left. She cycled the bolt. Second hostile dropped before he could shoulder his launcher. Cassandra's breathing was calm, robotic. Third target fell with a shot to the chest. Fourth collapsed mid-step, grenade tumbling from his grip. 1 round remained. Cassandra scanned quickly. The last RPG gunner crouched behind a ridge, just meters from a clear shot at the helicopter as the first SEALs loaded their wounded. He peeked out, aligning his sights. Cassandra found him in her scope, and time seemed to fracture. The world compressed to the whisper of her breath, the pulse in her fingertip. Her father's words echoed, "In the storm, you must be the calm." She squeezed. The round struck true, the fighter collapsing backward, his rocket clattering harmlessly into the dirt. Cassandra let her rifle rest, barrel smoking, chamber empty. She had nothing left to fire, but nothing more was needed. Below, the SEALs boarded under the cover she had provided. The helicopters lifted, rotor wash drowning out the valley's cries. Dust and smoke swallowed the battlefield, but inside that maelstrom, 22 men lived because one woman had refused to yield. For Cassandra, the silence afterward was not triumph. It was relief. Relief that her last bullet had not failed, that the ghost she carried would not multiply this day. She wiped the sweat from her brow, exhaled, and whispered to herself, "That's all that matters." The dust of the Carangal Valley settled slowly, as if even the wind itself was exhausted from carrying the weight of battle. The helicopters had gone, carrying the wounded and the weary back to safety. What remained in the valley was silence, broken only by the memory of gunfire and the steady echo of Cassandra, Ghostwind, Delaine's last shot. At the forward operating base, the after-action review was a quiet affair. The SEALs, men who rarely spoke of fear, wore it openly in their eyes that night. They knew how close death had come, how thin the line had been between annihilation and survival. And they knew who had drawn that line. Commander Aaron Lockhart stood before his team, his voice measured but heavy. "Staff Sergeant Delaine," he said, letting the silence stretch, "identified and eliminated 14 enemy combatants, disrupted flanking maneuvers, and provided overwatch that allowed this unit to extract with 0 fatalities. Without her actions, we would not be here tonight." Heads nodded around the room. Some bowed. Men who had once dismissed her as an outsider, as army support, now carried an unspoken reverence. Captain Marcus Vance sat apart, pale and hollow. His earlier confidence had evaporated, leaving only the shame of a man who had trusted screens more than the soldier standing beside him. Official reports would later phrase it diplomatically. Captain Vance reassigned to stateside training duty. Everyone in the room knew the truth. His career in the field had ended the moment Cassandra's bullets had proven him wrong. Reporters and historians would later ask Cassandra how it felt to be vindicated, to have been ignored, only to save the very men who had doubted her. But that night, she spoke just one sentence, her voice quiet, almost tender. Because those two wounded get to go home, that's all that matters. It wasn't about pride. It wasn't about saying, "I told you so." Cassandra carried her father's lessons too deeply for that. William Delaine had taught her that war was not about glory, but about the weight of lives saved and lost. True heroes didn't measure themselves by medals or recognition. They measured themselves by who made it home. Weeks later, in a quiet ceremony at Bagram Airfield, Cassandra was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. There were no cameras, no speeches of grandeur. Just a general handing her the medal and a few officers who understood what it meant. Cassandra accepted it with the same calm she had carried on the mountain. She asked that the citation be mailed to Colorado, to the small house where her father now lay, too weak to travel. When the medal arrived, William Delaine held it in his trembling hands. For a moment, the shaking stilled. He traced the inscription, eyes clouded by both pride and ghosts. Cassandra had carried his lessons into a new war, and she had proven them true. The mountain had not forgiven mistakes, but she had made none. For Cassandra, the battle in Caringal Valley became another memory carved into silence. She did not boast, did not repeat the story unless pressed. She returned to her rifle, to the discipline of cleaning every piece with the care her father had taught her. Because for her, the work was not about recognition. It was about readiness for the next storm, the next valley, the next desperate prayer over a radio. In the end, Cassandra Ghostwind Delaine's story is more than a tale of bullets and battle. It's a reminder about life today. In our modern world, many voices are overlooked, dismissed, or ignored until crisis reveals their worth. Think about the quiet coworker whose ideas never make the meeting table, the older neighbor whose wisdom gets brushed aside, or the family member who sacrifices silently without recognition. Cassandra shows us that silence can hold extraordinary strength, and that the unseen often carry the heaviest burdens. For Americans today, this lesson is timeless. Trust not only the data on a screen, but also the human instincts, the lived experience, and the courage of those around us. The mountain may belong to soldiers in Afghanistan, but each of us has valleys to cross, moments where staying calm in the storm changes everything. Now I ask you, what do you see in this story? Is Cassandra's discipline something we can bring into daily life, work, family, community? Or is her sacrifice unique to warriors in combat? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear your perspective. Thank you for watching, for honoring her silence, and for keeping these stories alive. Please like, subscribe, and join us for more untold stories of hidden courage.